You're listening to episode 98 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On this week's show, we will be talking about raising resilient kids and nurturing families during the pandemic and beyond. And we're going to be doing that with the help of good nutrition, good eating habits, regular mealtime routines, and my guest, Ekua Walker. Ekua is a pediatric child development nurse, and she is CEO, which stands for Chief Encouragement Officer. She lives and practices in the San Francisco Bay Area, for which I am very jealous because I love it out there. Ekua works with families of young children and teens with a range of challenges, including ADHD, communication delays, and disabilities that impact learning. She is board certified in primary care pediatrics, and she is the host of a phenomenal podcast called Moms Changing the World, where moms of all kinds from around the world find encouragement, tools, and inspiration to raise world changers. I like that, like change agents, world changers, one child at a time, one day at a time. And you can find Ekua at momschangingtheworld.com. On the show, we're going to talk about the importance of establishing routines, helping kids stay focused, reestablishing social skills. And we'll talk about how cooking with kids can help get our kids back on track with that skill. And we'll talk about anxiety, which is pretty common and something that we can definitely nip with good nutrition and good routines. So yeah, it's going to be kind of a different show from what we usually do. And I'm really, really excited about it. If you love the show, tell a friend about it. Post a review on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on lizshealthytable.com. You know, when you go there to my website, you can always check out the show notes from today's show, listen to past shows. You can check me out on Instagram and other social media channels. I'm at Liz Weiss on Instagram, kind of where I'm hanging out these days. All right, let's change the world with good nutrition and strong families. Let's recharge our batteries. It's time, people. We're getting back. We're back. And let's help our kids get back on track after a year like none other. Ekua Walker is here to walk us through the strategies for resilience. And I'm so excited to have her on the show. So welcome, Ekua.
Thank you so much. It is really an honor of mine to be able to join you in this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're going to have to tell everybody exactly how we connected. Should we start with the Liz Ekua connection, and then you can tell everybody a little bit more about yourself? Because this is what I love about our world, which is getting smaller by the minute, which is a good thing, right? But tell everybody how you and I got connected.
Sure. Well, in starting my career, as a child development nurse practitioner, I had a 45-minute commute, and I was looking for, podcasts, which were new in those days, about a decade ago. And I just did a quick search of, cooking and mom, nutrition tips, and, the Cooking with Moms was one of the, only ones available at the time. And it was really one of the best ones. I was so glad to find it. I would get to listen to Liz and Janice at the time chat away about how to feed children in a way that was not only, nutritious, but also fun and meaningful. And so I just felt like I was, pulling up at their kitchen table, joining in on the conversation and loving, every bit of it. And so I, followed her all these years and, it planted the seed in me, this intimate conversation that you can have on a podcast and feel like you've known someone for years. And it can be such a way of connecting with moms out there in the world. And so I, planted a seed for me to start my own podcast and to sprinkle in nutrition as well, which I do by interviewing guests and about a range of ways that they're changing the world. And how are you feeding your kids as you juggle everything else is one of the questions that I ask. So I reached out to Liz and just was so thrilled that she immediately responded. And we've been, chatting and preparing for this ever since.
Yeah. It's funny because I get so many emails. I have 2 email addresses. You emailed me through my work email, which was good because I get fewer ones there, and said, I've been listening to your podcast for all these years, which of course I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And that you had your own podcast. And as us podcasters do, we will often say, I'll be on your show if you'll be on my show. It's a little swap.
An exchange.
Yeah. And I don't usually have, nurses on, or doctors really. I usually have cookbook authors, dietitians. So I'm super excited because this has just been like a crazy year. And I feel like now that we're all working our way out of it, I've had my 2 vaccines, thankfully, and we need somebody to help us kind of get refocused and back on track and move forward in a way where we're ready. If, bad times hit us again, like we're going to coast through it, because we're going to be ready for it. So just tell everybody a little bit about what you do and, your family, where you live and your podcast. So just give us the little Reader's Digest on all that.
Version. Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm a part of a large practice where physicians and pediatricians will refer their children to our specialty practice for evaluation. So we see toddlers all the way up to high schoolers, even some young adults. And we're always just trying to understand the developmental story and the picture of what's going on with them. And usually it could be a speech delay, it could be an attention deficit or a attention challenge they're having, it could be a learning issue at school, but it often comes out through behavior. And so we partner with the parents to try to understand what's going on, make recommendations for interventions and treatment, and then help manage it with medications if needed, long-term or ongoing. So since the pandemic, I've been doing 2 days in the clinic and then 2 days of video visits from home, which has actually been a nice balance for our family to have some days where my husband and I are able to work from home, and our children have been back to school after everything shut down for the end of, the last academic year. Summer was just starting to get out there a little bit. And then in November, they were able to go back full time because they were in a private school that was able to make that happen a little bit sooner than the rest. So we were super thankful that we are kind of hitting a good stride as we see the light at the end of the tunnel that we're all talking about, both for the school year and for this pandemic.
And you've got 2 daughters, and how old are they?
Yes, they are 7 and 10. And so we're right in the thick of the school age, learning to read and write and, doing more of the projects. And, distance learning was a real awakening, because, we haven't been kind of in the classroom with our kids, right? And so all of a sudden, here we are, seeing the ins and outs of everything that they're dealing with through a virtual medium, of course. So I think that was very eye-opening, and it really helped us all to try to help each other, get through those times. And some families are still in that mode right now. And so, that's also meant that a lot of families have come to us as the clinic because they're seeing how their children are struggling with certain areas or aspects of learning. And so some of what, this time has allowed has been an insight or a window into our children's lives that we might not have had before, because so much of their time is spent in school, right? Yeah. So then on, my days off, I work on the podcast, momschangingtheworld.org, O-R-G at the end.
Oh, did I mess that up? Oh,
no worries.
My bad.
My bad. No worries. You definitely want to, hit .org. And then we try to fill our time with other things that are really meaningful and intentional. I love Zumba, and I'm certified to teach Zumba classes, and Zumbini, which is kind of the little sister of Zumba, where it's early childhood development Zumba, right? You bring together the world of music and fun with early music and drumming and dancing and
So
song and
fun.
play. Yeah. And my children are able to do that, with me sometimes. So we try to have a lot of fun with music and cooking. Of course, they love to bake with me, and so we're having a blast now, especially as we're getting back into a new sense of normal that we appreciate.
Zumba. Wow. I don't feel like I'm too dorky, I think, I'm not doing it. You can't make me, but it does sound like a lot of fun.
It really is like a dance party, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have to look for the fun, because it's just, it's been a challenging year for sure.
Yeah.
So there has been, this long period of stress and disruption for kids, for families, for the past year plus. And for your family and those that you counsel, with this disruption, like, what have you observed? Like, what's been like the most negative things that, and then we'll talk about solutions, but the negative things that have come out of this like abrupt disruption of our regular routines. I mean, I know a lot of us were running in a million directions. I know when my kids were younger, it was like almost too much. So maybe it's good to slow down, but what were some of the consequences, that you've seen of the disruption?
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest things were around loss and grief, because in a matter of days or even hours in some cases, there was this new intense level of loss of health. There was loss of life, loss of time and connection with people outside of our homes, or, grandparents and other relatives that we, would have otherwise spent much more time with, schoolmates, classmates, friends. All that, we took for granted as normal, and as we could, what we could rely on, that we could buy certain things in the grocery store when we wanted to, that we can move out and about. We lost that. And then in, leaving the house to go to school and work, was a major loss for many. And even, just knowing that we had enough money, right? Financial changes and losses took place as well. So that, some families struggled with knowing if they had enough money to put food on the table and get those groceries that, were in such high demand. And then there were events, that were lost that we can't get back, as far as milestones, right? Graduations, there were proms, there were birthdays, there were births, there were like memorials and grieving those losses in ways that we couldn't necessarily, do in person like we had always done. There were so many that I wanted just to give a big hug to, or even drop off a meal to, and we had to rethink and refigure out all of those things. And so the level of uncertainty that came with this loss made it even more difficult, because there was now this kind of stress and this constant stress that was happening. We didn't know in the beginning how long this was going to last. Was this going to be for days, weeks, months? I don't think any of us thought it was going to be for a year plus. And so that level of not knowing, was also very stressful. And so when you have all of the stress, and then we were all at home and we couldn't really necessarily go out and relieve the stress in the ways that we normally do, right? Maybe our hobbies that take us out, or sports, or, our gatherings, our clubs, our connections, church. I mean, a lot of the different ways that we would meeting up with friends for coffee or out to eat, all of those different things also had to, look different. So it became this pressure cooker situation for a lot of families, and a lot of children had to figure out, how are we going to deal with this kind of chronic level of stress that is building in our homes with not the usual outlets for it.
Right. Yeah. No, I was going to, when you talk about the whole grief thing, I feel like, when you hear about all those like stages of grief, the final one is like acceptance, right? And I think that's right. And for me personally, I went through all of that, everything. I'm sure everybody listening is like, yes, that was me. And then at some point you just accept it. And you're like, okay,
that's right.
This is the way it's going to be. And you try to make the best of it, which is when we all got very good at Zoom, not Zumba, but good at Zoom. And finding those really good Zoom yoga classes, right? Or whatever it is.
Whatever it is that you do.
But I mean, gosh, just so much turmoil, right? So much I know you had a few more
Right.
points you wanted to share. I cut
Yeah.
you off there, but
No, yeah. So, I mean, all of this impacts mental health in different ways. And so we see this in children manifesting in, behaviors, right?
right,
Maybe more
right.
emotional and crying, or maybe regression, right? To kids that were potty trained, are going back, or kids that were sleeping through the night aren't able to sleep through the night anymore, right? We kind of expect to see some developmental regression at times in stressful situations or major changes with young ones, or with older children. It might come out because school was the main expectation. Right now it's distance learning. It can come out in like disorganized ways of thinking, being more distracted, having more challenges with attention and focus, especially if they came in with it. Now, when your teacher's life-sized, it's one thing, but now when your teacher is a few inches on a computer screen, right, that you have to stare at all day long, it takes it to a whole nother level. So I think
Even like the teens and tweens,
yeah,
I've heard about depression rates going up, and because
exactly.
school's their life, that's like,
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
That's their whole they're social creatures. That's
that's
why I figured,
right.
hey, I've been through all that. I can take a year off. But these
Yeah,
poor,
for the young ones.
teens, tweens, 20 somethings, millennials, everybody,
Yeah.
it's, oh my gosh, at every level, right? It's so
Yes,
hard.
exactly. From toddlers, on up, right? Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, for the young adults, it's in the teens, it's a particularly challenging time, because we can go back and remember, all the questions that we had in our lives during those times and how hard it was. It was hard enough with adolescence and hormones and body changes and all of those things, but then now you add on a pandemic and the uncertainty of what college is going to look like, or what, getting your first job is going to look like, and that just adds a whole nother level of mental health challenge to it.
Yeah, just totally. So crazy the last year. But let's give people then some solutions, because we're getting vaccinated now. Things are opening back up, and so we got to bounce back. And it's funny because we use this word resilient or resilience all the time. So of course I had to look up the definition, because it's like we banter it about. But resilience is defined as bouncing back after a tough experience. So we need to really be thinking about it. Schools are reopening, and, people are getting back on track. We are returning to normal, so to speak. So I want to just talk about, some of the skills to help all of us make that transition back. Because, if we transitioned to being home for a year, now we have to transition back. Like, think of, somebody told me that there's one teacher, I forget who it was, maybe in New England somewhere, it must be a friend of a friend. She's back teaching, and with all the little ones, I guess kindergarten or first graders. And one little boy didn't know how to walk upstairs, because he must
Oh,
live in a
wow.
single story dwelling, and literally had to
Yeah.
work with him on those physical skills of just getting up the stairs.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's going to be wowza.
Yeah, yeah, it's a wild, wild west in some ways. We're still, going to see the longer term impacts of this on our children, especially the younger ones. But so there are some children who have never been to a playground before, right? And or now that they're coming out to a park or playground for the first time, they don't know what to do. There's all these equipment, there's these children running around, and it's not been a part of their experience,
Right.
because they're that young. And so you're right that there are some definite opportunities in all of this. And I'm excited to talk about some of the different opportunities that we have, in the midst of challenge and in the midst of storms. Right? Part of resilience is coping, and coping and having coping skills that will help us navigate through it, because life is going to have challenges. And I think if we can build that resilience with our children and help them gain that, they're going to be prepared for a level of life that we might not have been able to handle just because they've gone through this. So I think our children, as they're learning to bounce back, and as we're supporting them through that, I think it's an incredible opportunity to kind of have a different kind of foundation for coping with major changes and stress.
So I know we're going to get into routine and all that, but give me a few just top line, some of those coping strategies, because, even thinking about, when I look at my kids, right, and, high school, then college, and now out in the workforce, there's always bumps in the road. So you're saying if we can give our kids the good skills now on the heels of this pandemic, that as they go through life, they're going to be able to bounce back from things that happen in life, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it comes to back around to mindfulness and awareness, right? So if we can help our children, and it really starts with ourselves, right? We have to be present and in the moment enough to even just know what's going on, right? A lot of our emotions, are sometimes they just kind of kick in and take over anytime we perceive a threat. Our brain is an incredible machine, right? And an incredible organ that helps us to sense danger and react. And we need to have, mechanisms in place in order to respond to stresses. So our body's, kind of designed to have that. But, it was designed to have short-term stress, right? Stress that comes and goes. So when that lion or tiger or bear is about to chase you, right? Our bodies are designed to kick into gear to fight, flight or freeze out of survival sake, right? And so then over the time, as we've not had those same types of pressures that, stresses that will spike, our stress and then be released, it's come to a place where now our stressors tend to, increase, but they don't have that same release and they don't have that same letdown. And so then it just builds and
It's
builds
like
and
a
builds.
chronic
And so,
thing, right?
and
Chronic.
that's where
Yeah.
we come to that sense of chronic stress. And that is not what our body was built to handle, right? We were not built to kind of handle that. And so that's where inflammation kicks in, right? And I think we are
Yeah.
learning more and more than we ever have about how, the role that inflammation in our body plays in health. And a lot of our health conditions, if not all of them, inflammation plays some role in whether in its creation or formation within our bodies or its worsening and severity in our health. So if we can learn to be mindful, present, and aware of what's happening both inside us and outside of us, we can go a long way, to helping ourselves and our children cope with what's going on.
So give me a few then. Let's talk about
Yeah.
coping. And I will say, the other day I was in the supermarket and I always look at magazine covers. I look at the food magazines. And
Mm-hmm.
it was either on keto, which I don't like the whole keto diet, not my jam. It was
Okay.
gluten-free, which totally,
Uh-huh.
my son's gluten-free and we're big into that here. And inflammation, anti-inflammatory diets. I've actually done a podcast on it. And, I'll give a shout out to fruits and vegetables and whole grains and seafood, right, for as anti-inflammatory
Right.
foods.
Mm-hmm.
But we could eat really well. And I did promise at the top of the show we'll talk about a little bit of nutrition in and out here. But what are some of, other than like eating well, or give us some of those sort of ways
Right.
that we can cope, because that chronic stress, that's not a
Yeah.
good thing. I mean, a lot of Americans live with chronic stress, and now
Right.
a lot of Americans are living with chronic stress.
Even more than
Yeah.
before.
So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
are some coping strategies? Like how do we, as parents with kids, alleviate that chronic stress? You got to recognize it, right? The mindfulness piece, but how do you
Exactly.
alleviate it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, one important thing is to kind of, I guess, give time, make space for whatever the feeling or whatever the stress or whatever is going on. Oftentimes we're like in such a hurry and such a rush to get through it. And we often say, oh, you'll be fine. Right. And we blow through, what our children are experiencing. But if we can be the first to make space, for how they're feeling, even if it's just sitting down, once in like right before bed, that can be a really great time to just have a little check-in, make it one-on-one if you can with the child and, see how things are going, and how they're feeling. Right. So making time and space to acknowledge, what your child is feeling, I think is a good place to start. If you can in the moment, be calm and present enough yourself to stop, in the middle of whatever's happening. When you start to see, the stress building up and you start to see the pressure building, if you as a parent, and I'm working on this all the time, can slow down enough to take a breath, so breathing is going to be the next, tip, to take a breath yourself so that you can then, sit with your child and hopefully point out if you can stop the escalation from going through, becoming a volcano, catch it early and really check in and say, I notice, you're running around so much right now. Let's just take a minute and just sit. Let's sit with mom, sit on my lap or whatever works for your child, right? Let's just sit and check in, see, let me know how are you feeling right now? What's going on right now? And just give them again that opportunity to share what's going on if you can in the moment. And I know it's hard because we're feeling our feelings, right? So the next part of it is to check in with ourselves and make sure we're not feeding into the behaviors or feeding into the reaction that our children are having, because so much of the buildup is a kind of a feeding off of each other, right? That happens. We literally have neurons, mirror neurons, right, that are designed for us to be, because we're social beings, for us to understand and perceive and receive what's happening with our caregivers. And so there is a feeding off of that's designed for evolutionary purposes, right? In order for children and parents to bond and to co-regulate is the term, right? Regulate kind of each other, right? So that the parent, hopefully, is the calming presence and force by meeting the needs of the child so that the child can then relax, that they don't have to ramp up. And so if we can catch ourselves and we can choose how we're going to respond instead of react to the situation, then we can lead the de-escalation and the calming in the moment rather than feed the escalation and the chaos that typically ensues.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I know when my boys were young, imagine like someone gets hurt or, something like you immediately like, ah. And I remember years and years, I mean, so long ago when I was I think I was in like middle school. I think it was day 2 of middle school. And, middle school can be so wonky.
Oh, yeah.
We called it junior high school back then. And I was fighting with my sisters or clowning around and I went to run and I whacked my head like into the side of the door and we're all laughing. Well, I get up, of course, the blood is dripping down.
Oh, no.
And I can remember my dad, because he had a lot of anxiety. Oh my God. He just like runs, he picks me up, he throws me on the bed. I'm like, I don't even know I'm bleeding at the time. Right.
Wow.
Went into this whole tailspin. And I remember it so clearly because of that like intense reaction. Whereas he should have been, my mother, of course, very calm. It's okay, Bob. I did get stitches though, FYI.
Right.
So, I love this though, is like being present. And I guess even during the pandemic, when prior to we're running in a million directions, but it's still hard to be in your own home running in a million directions, especially, you got meals to get on the table, you've got homework to do, there's just so much going on. But I like that, to just, be present and just to kind of stay calm and help your kiddo through that process.
Yeah. And then the other thing to remember is that we as parents, at the end of the day, we're thinking like, how is our child going to get through this? Or am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Am I cooking the right thing? Ultimately, our children just need us and our presence, like more than anything else. There's some fascinating, research that comes out of war times. I believe it was, kind of World War II, where children who, there was that tough decision to be made in the urban areas where a lot of the fighting was happening. The decision, a lot of families made a decision to send children to relatives and families
out of the country,
out of the country. Yeah. And so, researchers were able to kind of study and track and follow. And, some children were not, for whatever reason, able to leave the urban area and go out to the country. And so they would follow, both, and saw how both sets of children did. And what would you guess as far as, who fared better?
Well, I would think, well, no, let me guess now. You said, what would you guess now? I'm guessing. Oh my gosh, I got to get it wrong. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you would think you'd think you would do better if you stayed with the parent, but you're also in this horribly stressful situation, right?
Yeah. Yes. So you're on the right track. The children who stayed with parents,
they did better.
Though they were in the horribly stressful situation, did better than those who were sent away.
Wow.
And even though their environment may have been less stressful, they weren't with parents. They might have been with relatives, might have been with strangers. But the result of all of that was the importance of parents and that co-regulation, right, as a protective factor came out to
Interesting.
be very strong. And so that a lot of the attachment and the bonding research that we, take for granted nowadays, came out of a lot of that time. And so, so ultimately parents, just your presence, just being there, being available and maintaining that connection with your child is more important, the most important thing.
So
You are enough.
interesting. Wow, you are enough. Oh, I
Yeah.
like that. I'm writing that down. You
Yeah.
are enough. We don't have to be superstars, right? We are enough. So I'm a big believer in routine. And I think kids actually thrive on it. I'm not saying they have to be like boxed in and routine, like every 5 minutes you have something going on, but routines set expectations. You always hear a fear of the unknown, right? So if you have a routine, you have that expectation. So and I do think like mealtime and food and nutrition fits in very nicely with the story of routines because it's, breakfast, it's snack, it's lunch, it's dinner. Like we're in a routine. There's that expectation. Is that something
Yeah.
that's a good thing and is something we should try to kind of continue as we move
Yeah.
forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. The brain is an incredible, it's an association machine, right? I talk about this, quite a bit that our brain, it works to make associations and connections so that it is easier for it the next time around, to go through and know what to do. And when we have new experiences, we're forming new pathways, our brain has to work a lot harder. And when we don't, we have to make a lot more decisions. And that takes a lot of energy for the brain, and the body. And so if we can put something into autopilot, right? If we can do something enough so that that pathway and connections within the brain is so natural and so it's like that grooved path, right? Then the brain and body doesn't have to work as hard and it can save its energy and its reserves for other, new tasks or other, things that are coming along the way. So the more we can put things into habit mode, the less mental energy and the less stress our body and brain experiences. And so that is why routines are so critical to ourselves. And, as adults, we kind of take it for granted. We've had years, if not decades, to hone our like morning routine. We get up, we, might do a little bit of stretching, we brush our teeth and shower, we might grab that coffee or that tea, we have our breakfast. We know what we kind of need, maybe a little bit of, down a little bit of maybe a prayer, reflection, meditation to get our day going. We've kind of figured out what it takes for us to feel like we're fresh and energized and ready to take on the day. And kids are still figuring all of that out, right? They don't have the decades or years of experience, right, of figuring out what they need to feel ready for whatever the next task is at hand. And so when we help them establish routines, we're helping, helping take the burden right off of them. And we're helping them to establish those pathways so that they, again, don't have as much mental work and energy that they have to spend not knowing how their needs are going to be met.
I think pre-pandemic routines were hard because, you had school and everything, but I felt like kids were so overscheduled. And even with my boys, we would sometimes have to say, okay, you have to give up a sport or we got to give up something because it's just too much. I think it's hard to establish a routine when it's like every season is a different sport and, they're bouncing all over the place. So maybe moving forward, we need to just kind of, stop and smell the roses a little bit and not be so overscheduled that a routine is like almost impossible to stick to. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We also need, like in our routine, we build in downtime because our body and brain need downtime. And that's one of the, I think, opportunities or one of the lights that was shown in all of this is that some kids were doing better because they had more downtime, or they were doing better because they didn't have to be up and out of the house, by 6 or 7 in the morning. Or some children were doing, better because they didn't have 3 or 4 activities crammed after school before homework and dinner and bedtime and all of that. And so slowing down, clearing the schedule a little bit and being really choosy and selective about, how many activities or which activities to get back to, making sure you plan for the downtime. Because remember, our body, needs, the little bit of that stress and energy kind of gets you going, but it needs the rest. It needs the downtime. It needs the relaxation to refresh and reset. And then you're ready for the next thing.
Right. I love that. I always feel like I need more downtime personally in my life. I'm always like, oh, I'm buzzing all over the place. And sometimes it's
Yeah.
nice to just like, for me,
Just
go for a
veg,
walk,
chill.
listen to a book,
Yeah.
listen to a podcast, hint,
Yeah.
hint.
Right, right.
So, oh, we didn't really get into your podcast too much. Well, you know what? Save it for the end. I want you to tell everybody a
Okay.
little bit more about your show. And if I forget to ask you, you
Sure.
better nudge me. Okay.
Sure, will do.
I want to talk. So we talked about routine and just that importance of really establishing it moving forward. There's this whole thing of like attention and focus, because I feel like it's for kids who've now been like staring at a computer all day, trying to
Yeah.
study, and
Yeah.
so focus and attention are hard. Like what can we do habitually to help kids stay a little bit more focused, pay a little bit more attention? Because especially with like the cell phones and kids are always staring at them, like they don't
Yeah.
hear a thing of what you're saying because they're always busy looking at the TikTok or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah.
So attention and focus. And
Yeah.
maybe we'll talk about a
Yeah.
few foods that help with that too.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, multitasking, was kind of the big thing, right?
A badge of
Multitasking
honor.
yeah,
Yeah, I can
exactly. We can
multitask.
brag exactly about how well we multitask, how many things we're doing. And
Mhm.
I know, I think in the Bay Area, we are definitely guilty for just, being on that kind of, Silicon Valley, race, right? That rat race just to, kind of do the most things, be ahead, that, you name it, you list it, it's happening. And it's a common theme around the country and around the world in this time that we live in. But when we look at all of the science around, how our brain functions when it's multitasking, it actually goes down a notch when we're doing more than one thing at a time. So we think we're so efficient, right, by doing, 5 or 4, 10 things all at the same time. But yet when we can focus on one thing, we do that one thing better. And then when we focus on the next thing, we do that next thing better, rather than trying to do, all 5 of them at the same time. So, so now the new thing is single tasking, right? And the evidence is really
I'm
around.
writing that down too.
That's right. All right, actually doing one thing at a time. I know, revolutionary, right? And the whole premise being that if we can get really good at not letting ourselves and our children be distracted by multiple things at multiple times and not strive to multitask, we actually do so much better. And again, it brings us back around to kind of that whole idea of mindfulness, right? Being present in the moment on purpose, right? Non-judgmentally, right? So that you can actually fully experience, your brain can only kind of handle so much information at one time and handle it well. And so there's books now on kind of getting into your zone or finding your sweet spot, and all of them line up with or are encouraging us to get back to better single tasking than we are multitasking.
That's the best thing I've heard all year. I am so excited to hear that.
Yes.
But it's even like if you think about mealtime, like family mealtime, which is a great thing to have as your daily routine. But when you have the phones at the table or the TV on, that's almost like multitasking in a way, because you're asking kids to sit and focus on you and have a conversation, but then they're drifting away because, they're looking down at the phone or they're looking at the TV. So I think that's a really good reason to get rid of all screen time during mealtime, so that it's that single tasking and you can really focus. And you're going to do it better, meaning mealtime will be better. Kids will eat better. Everybody will be happier.
Yes, you actually will experience, your food. I was being more kind of mindful and aware about my food and eating recently. And I realized that almost all of my meals at one point were in front of the computer for work, or had the cell phone next to me for, even if it was a quote unquote break, or I was somehow distracted, or, some families, it's in the car, eating in the car, right? And I just was really struck at how many of my, kind of like the non-dinner family meals were spent doing something else and not paying attention to the eating part. And of course, when we do studies on this, or we look at studies on this, we find that people will eat more, they'll eat more calories because they're not really attuned and attended to what they are eating. They will make poor decisions, right? If you're not focusing on the food that, the food that you're eating. And you will be hungrier sooner, right? Like you will want to eat again sooner because you weren't paying attention to the cues of the food and the eating experience that you were having to begin with. And so that's really challenged me to leave the phone in the other room, get up from my desk, sit at the, at the kitchen table. And even if it's just by myself, right? Even that and can be that mindful eating experience that will go so much farther than trying to do it at the desk.
I love that. I love that. So that brings me to my question, which is, what does family mealtime look like for you and your husband and your two daughters? What's the dynamic? And then I do want to hear about your favorite family recipe and why.
Sure, sure. Well, yeah, we, thanks to, of course, all the great advice I had from the very beginning, we've always prioritized family meals as our family time. And thankfully, both my husband and I grew up, eating family meals around the table. So we, in many ways, took it for granted as a dedicated time that our family would have, as our children were young, growing up and continuing to today. So we really love it. We have no screens, at all at our table or, around the table. We try to have fun, as we're preparing, the meal. I try to, I get the kids, I ask the kids to, just give 10 minutes, right? If it's setting the table, if it's, whipping a salad together, we're trying to do that as a family, especially since a lot, we were home all together. In these, last couple of months this year. And so then once we're eating, my husband and I both enjoy cooking. And so it's fun to, take turns or to both of us, cook parts of the meal that we put together. And now the kids are learning, how to, help pitch in, right? That, that salad. And so everybody kind of feels like we were a part of creating that meal together. And then when we're actually eating, we love to, just chat about how the day was, what were the highs and lows of the day. I love doing the rose of the day, what was the thorn of the day, what was the, the bud of the day. And I hear, former President Obama and, his family would do that at their dinner table for their family dinners. Yeah.
So the rose is the high point, the thorn is the negative. What's the bud?
Yeah, the bud is the little glimmer of hope or the little something, the little idea or the little potential in the day.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So it's a fun thing to add because, then you're starting to look for, what's that new idea that's brewing or percolating, or what's that wish that we might have, that we want to maybe make into our weekend plans. Right. And so it's been fun to have those kind of conversation starters. And now my kids are old enough that, that they decide what they want to talk about, and they kind of lead the conversation as well. And then we have some fun. I was mentioning before during the interview we did on my podcast that we have some fun games that we're doing now around the family meal table, right? We're telling stories. We're, each contributing a sentence to this family story that we're creating. And so somebody starts it off and then everybody just adds a sentence like, I used to do, I think, around the campfire.
Telephone.
At summer camp.
We call it the telephone.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. And so you just keep adding and the story just grows and you never know where it's going to go because every person kind of has their own angle or their own, spin that they might throw in where you thought the story was going. Or we might do rhyme time. My little one is, learning to read and write. And so there's a lot of rhyming themes and the words and the sight words and the things that they're learning. So she kind of takes the lead on that one. And we start doing rhyming stories and sayings and poems that are a whole lot of fun. And so, we're definitely enjoying our family meals these days.
It's great. Family mealtime is so fun. And, it's funny because I know you did a podcast a few weeks ago, maybe it was more than a few weeks ago with an RN from, she had a British accent. I forget where she lives, but she was talking about in England, right? They're very focused on manners.
Yes.
And my husband's British, right? So when he grew up,
Okay.
I'm going to just share this with you. Right. And I don't know if my listeners know this, but manners were very important. So when Tim grew up, he would have to learn how to eat without his elbows flaring. So his dad would put books under his arms. He and his brother would have to eat with the book under the arms. So everything's all like tight in, right? I hope people are watching this recording. If you're just listening, you got to go watch the recording.
Look it up.
So the arms are like tight in, and now he's got to like get peas on the back of his fork and somehow get the peas up to the mouth without the peas falling. it's a little bit strict, and Tim didn't view it as strict. His brother viewed it as very restrictive and strict and not fun. Right. So I think there's that fine line, like you want manners, you want respect, but it can't be so punitive. Right. Because we don't want the negative vibes, around the table.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talk food though. Talk food. To give me like the favorite recipe and why.
Sure. Yeah. So growing up, I'm originally from Ghana in West Africa, and I came to California when I was 4 years old with my family.
And why did they come? Why'd they come here?
My dad was going to UCLA for his graduate work in urban planning.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Okay.
So we, have been in California ever since. And so what was nice about that is that my parents, all they knew was, Ghanaian food, or most of what, they knew was Ghanaian cooking. And so I grew up with Ghana in my home, right? And so loved eating, the Ghanaian foods. And and similar in Africa, there are a lot of gravies and stews that you are very oftentimes very plant-based, a lot of, vegetables, that whatever is grown locally or regionally. And then there are there's some meats and proteins that are often stewed in or grilled or, added or cooked in with, there's jollof rice, which is kind of, most people have heard of Spanish rice or Mexican rice. It's our version, right, of that tomato stewed based rice with lots of spices and flavors. And then the stew or the soup, we have peanut butter soup.
Love peanut butter soup. Love.
As another favorite. Yes. And we'll have that with different starches. So, pounded yam, potatoes, sweet potato, cassava, are the traditional, some traditional starches. Of course, there's rice as a popular starch, but there's also cassava that's dried and turned into a grain called gari. That's like couscous, but a little more sandy in texture, similar flavor. But, all the starches take on those great, rich tomato and onion and garlic based flavors. So one of my favorites was eggplant stew. And so eggplant was the kind of center vegetable, or garden eggs as they called them there. And I've kind of made it my own over the years. So I've kind of meal makeovered it myself to be, to have a little bit less of the fat, a little bit less of the oil, take a little bit less time to prepare. So it's not hard at all. You start off with chopping up, your canned, your onions, you throw in a can of tomatoes, and you bring that together with garlic and ginger. And so as that, cooks down, you can be boiling the chopped, cubed eggplant separately if you like the eggplant to boil down and be more soft, or you can keep it chunky and add it in at the end, depending on, what you prefer. But once the tomato stew is going, then you kind of flavor it up with a little bit of turmeric, and you can do paprika, and oftentimes peppers are used in the cooking. So you can make it as spicy as your palate handles, or you can, just sprinkle a little bit of red flake pepper. And then the broth, traditionally a Maggi cube or a bouillon cube is thrown in, but I've, made it a little more healthy with just the bone, like a paste, right?
A paste.
The paste, yeah. The better than bouillon, kind of paste. Yeah, to just, scoop in a teaspoon or two of that for that rich, flavor. If you want it to have the chicken in there, you could always do a veggie cube if you prefer to keep it all veggie. And then a little bit of salt, a little bit of oregano if you want a bit of that flavor as well. And as it cooks down, you finish it off by adding the eggplant. And then the eggplant, it just is a really rich, for me, the texture was great. And growing up, that's the only way I ate eggplant. And when we would eat it in other places or at potlucks or restaurants, I never really liked it, because I'm like, wait, where's the sauce that goes with it? And where's the great texture? It was just a little bit just too bland for me and too kind of wet in the traditional ways that it was prepared. Outside of that. But I think it's a testament to just being used to eating the eggplant, growing up in that way. As an adult, I think I had some eggplant in lasagna, and I was like, okay, this I can handle, right? Or, this way of preparing
eggplant parmesan
works for me. And then ratatouille is my other favorite way to use eggplant now. So that was one of the things is I didn't think I liked eggplant, right? Unless it was in this particular, stew. But because I've I grew up eating it. Now, as an adult, I can enjoy it in a wide variety of ways. So,
I like it roasted. Like I would want to roast those cubes and maybe add them.
yeah,
And
yeah,
for the can of
exactly.
tomato, do you use like a diced tomato
Yeah.
and is it the
Mhm.
big can or the smaller can?
It is the 14,
Oh
15
yeah,
ounce, because
15
you can
ounce.
use,
Yeah.
you can use 2 or 3 whole tomatoes if you have them, or fresh
Oh,
tomatoes as
instead of,
well.
yeah. Oh, it sounds so
Instead,
good.
yeah,
So
yeah,
interesting. Yeah. I don't always think of eggplant as like the go-to, veggie for kids,
yeah,
but the fact that that was like,
right.
part
Yeah.
of,
Oh,
what I'm realizing when we were talking about, focus and all that. One thing I did all want, I wanted to like remind people too that like sleep is really important for focus because a lot
yes,
of
it
people will
is.
say, what can I eat? I need more energy. And I always say, you need to go to bed earlier. Like you gotta get sleep. And there are
Yeah.
several foods out there that naturally do contain melatonin. We always hear
Mhm.
about melatonin. I don't ever recommend
Yeah.
supplements for kids, but tart cherry juice, milk, like the whole warm milk thing. When my boys were young and they
Oh,
couldn't sleep, I'd
yeah.
always give them warm milk at night, eggs, fish, especially like the fatty fish, and nuts.
Yeah.
Nuts are just like a powerhouse. And those are just foods now, like a little tart cherry juice before bed, just a little bit. And that does seem to help with sleep. And I think, for our kids, especially getting back into action, sleep's going to become
Mhm.
really important. We can never
It
forget about
is.
that. We
It
can't.
is. Yeah. Yeah. We really, sleep hygiene is something that we often forget about, and I think screens, we kind of brought them up a little bit, already, but having that screen time right before bed really kind of works against a lot of the body's natural cues to wind down and get tired and sleepy. So if you can make that a part of the routine, right, to have screens turned completely off 1 to 2 hours before bedtime, then you're setting the stage for not allowing the blue light to factor into making it hard for kids to fall asleep. You also can start dimming lights in the house, and you can again use the natural cues around the whole melatonin cascade is really light. A lot of it is light driven and light based, and now that we live in a time when we just have lights on all the time and the whole house is light bright, that can work against the again the body's natural cue that when the sun is setting and it's getting darker, I need to go to sleep. So yeah, I'm constantly talking with families about a good wind down routine before bed, that warm bath, that warm milk, maybe reading or journaling time, which is a very great mindfulness practice, to build into your child's bedtime routine. And then maybe turn on that nice music or the night sounds, that again take advantage of our senses to help us calm and soothe, right before bed.
I like the cricket sounds or the waterfall, the noise machine that we
Yes.
all have on our
Yes.
phones.
That's right. That's right. Waterfalls and
Yeah, I like
beach
that.
sounds work
I
for
love
me.
that. Yeah, the ocean. So, social skills, because we have been somewhat isolated, I always think about cooking together. I think that's why a lot of these virtual Zoom cooking classes and experiences have been so popular. And I will put a plug in for my listeners that my friend Lori DeLiso and I, she's the founder of Kids Cooking Green. We are hoping to do a series of like these cook-alongs through the year. So I'll let you know, Akua, if we do them. And if anybody
Please
else is
do.
interested in jumping into a
Yeah.
Zoom cook along with us or having
Sounds like
kids, we were
fun.
thinking maybe for tweens and teens. We haven't fully decided yet, but this like cooking with your kids, cooking together. That's a great way to, I think, and boost a child's social skills and social savvy because they're cooperating together, they're working together as a team. So as you kind of
Exactly.
transition back into normal, get your kids in the kitchen and cook together,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes. Our social skills and our social time really, really kind of took an interesting turn, with the pandemic. And, we, especially young ones, right, we're used to being able to go out or school age, and see their peers and on a
Right,
regular
right.
basis. And, that looked very different in distance learning or hybrid learning online. So, yeah, social skills and social time, definitely looked different. And even now, as kids are back to school, it's still with masks, where half your face is covered. And, reading social cues is totally different if you have a mask covering your face, your mouth, and, all people see are your eyes. And so it's definitely still a journey back to helping kids with a lot of that. But you're right that cooking in the kitchen and being together as a family is that foundation for communication and social skills. For sure. We started doing a few of the like meal kits. HelloFresh was
those are
one
fun.
that, yeah. And my daughter, my older one, really liked like the pictures, everything's laid out, everything's right there. And so she could feel like she was, in charge of cooking that night, or, in charge of making that meal happen, just because of, it was presented in a way that works for her. And so we, added her to the rotation for, helping get dinner on the table. And, she's only 10. And so it's one of those things where, the kids can help in a variety of ways, even from a young age,
Yeah.
and pull the stool up in there. You definitely have to monitor for safety and all of those things. But our young, the salad kits are fun. And my little one can just, pop that salad kit apart, pull it together. And we hardly have to, help her at all. Right. So sometimes that confidence that's built and just being, more and more independent with some of the cooking as they've done it with you, for, months or years is really beautiful to watch. And I'll put a plug in for chores here as well. I love that, you always kind of had your kids helping. If you were making the meal, right, they're helping with dishes and table.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
That's right. Chores are really a critical, teaching tool. And I think a lot of us move away from it or shying away from it because it is easier and faster to do it ourselves oftentimes. But if we don't give kids a chance to build some of these skills early when they're wanting to help and when they're curious, or when I do it, I can do it, right? And even if it's as simple, as just setting the table, right, or putting out, the mats, or bringing the spoons and the forks, or putting them in the dishwasher, right? They can, even young ones can do even a little part, and then they'll feel that sense of belonging. They feel that sense of agency and control, and that autonomy. Like I got this. I can do some things for myself, and that's a foundation for self-confidence, for leadership. That's an important step that we sometimes forget about when we think about chores. And so having a routine that includes daily chores or weekly chores, or whatever your child and family and schedule can handle, the better for the kids.
Well, but here's the caveat. If you have a 22-year-old, as I do, and at the beginning of the pandemic, I have a cleaning lady, and she was coming once a month traditionally. And that, of course, ended for many months. And I finally got so sick of the house was so dirty. And I finally said to Tim and Simon, okay, we're having a cleanup morning. Let's go. And I filled a bucket with water and gave Simon a mop. He was so unhappy about this particular chore. I mean, he's great at dishes. And he's good at cooking, but he literally sabotaged the whole project. He was mopping and leaving just puddles everywhere. I was so mad. So of course, never asked him to help with that again. And he knew it. So it all changes, Ekua. I was like, trust me. Right. Oh, it changes. It changes. So let's wrap it up with just a few words on anxiety, because we have seen that increase, certainly. And it's common, anxiety is common right now in our society with people of all ages. So what exactly is anxiety? And then, maybe we'll talk a few foods that, where there's some research to show, that it can alleviate anxiety.
Sure. Yeah. Anxiety, is one of those things where you have intense worry, fear, fear of the worst coming on, and, not necessarily going away. And that stress and that strain starts to impact how you're functioning. And so since we're talking about children, I'll share a little bit with children, and that it might look like acting out, more tantrums, more crying. It can be like a regression. It can behavior, milestones they've met that they're no longer kind of able to handle. because they, often can't tell us, that they're anxious or stressed out. It's often going to come out in behavior. So, changes in sleep and changes in eating can be big flags, that there's some mental health challenges going on around anxiety that need to be addressed. Sleeping too much, sleeping too little, eating too much, eating too little. And so, I see food as medicine and as the first medicine. And so I think it's an incredible opportunity to look at and figure out, what are some nutrition ways that we can maybe have a foundation to help health again, not to minimize, any of the behaviors or the, emotions that people go through, or to say that there's any quick fix about it. But if we can have building blocks, right, that really help, manage that kind of chronic level of stress that starts to interfere so that we can help our children and ourselves.
And we talked about this, at the top of the show, certainly, and you gave us some really great strategies, for helping our kids who are having anxiety. As far as some of the, the foods, I'm not going to talk about supplements because for kids, it's just oftentimes just not appropriate. I think a good general multivitamin is a good idea, but certain foods and certain nutrients that people can kind of be mindful of, selenium. That's a nutrient that can reduce inflammation. And we've talked a lot about inflammation today and has been shown to improve mood and anxiety. So that would be like nuts, mushrooms. Brazil nuts are very high, but you can actually eat too much selenium. So don't eat more than 3 or 4 Brazil nuts. Soybeans contain selenium. Omega-3 fats, found in fatty fish. So you want to eat seafood twice a week. Magnesium, that's a good one. Magnesium is one of these nutrients that has so many important functions, in the body. And so magnesium is another good nutrient to be mindful of. And there's so many really good foods that are high in magnesium. So you've got dark chocolate, which is my favorite, avocados, another favorite, nuts, legumes, tofu, seeds, whole grains, leafy greens, bananas, fatty fish. I'll give you a list in the show notes. But, it's like all those good foods that I always talk about, right? Just eating lots of color, eating lots of plants, eating a well-balanced diet. That's like a foundation, right? That we can kind of be building on.
Yeah. We have our salmon meal at least once a week, which we love. And I think once I realized how easy it was to cook, you can do the sheet pan dinner kind of approach, or you kind of put the salmon on, you can put your veggies on, and, sometimes under 20 minutes, everything can be done. It's pretty incredible.
I do love salmon, a sheet pan dinner with salmon. Just like I'm thinking broccoli is a good one to have on that sheet pan, right? Because it actually cooks pretty quickly. It might even cook before the salmon is done.
Yeah.
It moves fast.
And we were talking about tomatoes as well. That's a fun one to throw on there.
Yeah, so I was on Ekua's podcast. I don't know when my interview with you is running. This show that people are listening to now is launching June 2nd. So I don't know if my show with you goes live before or after.
It'll be around then.
Oh, good. So tell everybody a little bit before we let you off the hook here. We've been chatting for a long time, but just tell everybody a little bit about momschangingtheworld.org and people, and then where, tell us about the show and then where people can find you on the web and on social.
Yes. So the show is an interview-based show where I talk to moms from different walks of life who are changing the world in interesting ways. So, much like Liz, is as a leader and forerunner in nutrition and family health. I talk to people in, finance. I talk to people who are leading, social justice movements. I've talked to people who are raising their children in other countries and just impacting this, pretty much, you think of a topic, we've talked about it on the show. And so I love just highlighting the mom journey because all moms are changing the world as we, are raising the next generation of world changers, as you mentioned, and it's not an easy job, especially as many of us are, also juggling work and careers, and so we support one another, through the mom journeys and stories and tips and strategies. We talk food, we talk self-care, and we talk mindfulness in order to help ourselves raise children who are conscious, aware, and ready to be the leaders for making this world a better place.
I love it. And resilient.
Yeah. That's right. And resilient. Absolutely. Yeah. So you can find me on www.momschangingtheworld.org, and on social, if you search Ekua Walker or Moms Changing the World, you'll find my page pop up. And I do have a Facebook group, Mom Changing the World podcast, where you can also join the conversation. So
I need to join that. Well, thank you so much for hopping onto the show. This was so much fun. It was great. Good collaboration. So thanks again, Ekua. Yeah, it was great. And so everybody head on over and check out Moms Changing the World, because I'm on Ekua's podcast and she has lots of other great episodes. I always tell people, if you love the show, post a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. Listen to Ekua's show, post a review for her. As always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.